I'm Edith Gilbert, and today is June 10th, 2009. We are in the Charlevoix Public Library taping an interview with Steve Braun, who recently retired as golf pro from the Belvedere Golf Course. This interview is part of the Charlevoix Oral Traditions Project. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
I understand that the Belvedere Club seems to be a course that has stood the test of time. Tell us about the beginnings.
Well, the course didn't get started until about 1925, but in 1878, the Charlevoix Home Association got started. There were the three original officers of the club there were all from Kalamazoo, a couple of ministers, one was a teacher. But then in 1925, they wanted to add to the recreational situation besides tennis and sailing, which has always been a big thing. And they went out and they looked at the Supernaw Farm and the Hooker Farm, which are on either side of Marion Center Road, as we know it today. And they hired a fellow from down by Chicago who had a large landscaping firm. His name was Vern Miller. Still have pictures of Vern, and he sort of surveyed the whole thing for them. Also gave them an idea of the value of the land. And then they got together with him when he said, you know, this I think this could be a really good golf course, but you need somebody that knows more about golf than me. Well, fortunately, in town at the Chicago Club, there was a fellow by the name of William Watson. And he was one of the top architects of his day.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting fellow. He taught lessons over at the Chicago Club, but he laid out a number of really outstanding golf courses over the years. He laid out the Olympic Club in San Francisco, where many U.S. Opens have been played.
Yes.
Hogan lost to Fleck there in a major upset. Palmer lost to Casper there. He also laid out Minnetonka, which is still in existence today, great golf course, and Interlaken, which is part of the Bobby Jones Grand Slam.
Right.
So strong background. In fact, there's a book that is still considered by architects today as sort of the Bible of golf course architecture. And in that book, 3 of the holes on the Belvedere are sketched and drawn out.
Really?
And even the young architects today will refer to that book. George Thomas put that book out in the, I might be wrong by a year or so, but 29 or 30. But even young architects like Tom Doak, who is one of the most famous architects in the world now, happens to live in Traverse City. And he brings his young interns to the Belvedere because back then, much of the land at Belvedere was farmland. It was black muck. You know, it was good for growing things.
Yes.
But to make greens back then, you would just sort of push that black muck all together. Well, you can imagine that kind of soil, while it's rich for growing things, it's not real porous.
Right.
And so the water just sort of, after a bad rainstorm, just lays right on top of it. So you had to really know what you were doing in terms of laying out the greens. They had to be natural water courses coming off the greens for the water to run off. Otherwise it would sit on top of that black muck and it would be unplayable if they were real flat. And so Tom Doak will still bring his young interns up today to study what Watson did, you know, 75, 80 years ago.
Imagine.
So that's one of the reasons that you can say it stood the test of time. It was built back then, you know, things are simpler. 115 men, 4 or 5 teams of horses. I think the men were paid 35 cents an hour. And the horses, I think the teams I read were hired out for like $4 for the day.
Imagine.
Part of what that led to, though, that helps it stand the test of time is with a lot of the new equipment, when they do fairways, they sort of bulldoze them and they're very flat. A lot of the old, what are called classic courses, because they were built in simpler times, there are more humps and bumps in the fairways. And one of the beauties of that is when you go out and play it at some of these classic old courses, you can play the same hole that you've played many times and never have the shot into the green that you had because you might be a little bit on a downslope or the ball might be away from you this way or above your feet,
I see.
or an uphill lie, and you might only be 8 feet from where you were the day before.
Well, I know people like to play there every single day. They don't
Yeah, it's
choose to run around a different course.
Well,
every
they
day.
don't need to, and another reason that it stands the test of time, Edith, is that people of varying calibers of golfing skill can play the course because there are open entrances to the greens. You get somebody, gals or men getting older like me that don't have the club head speed of the kids today, can still roll the ball up onto the greens. They're not all forced carries over water and over steep bunkers. So you can get everything from an 80-year-old gal that just loves the recreation, and that's what it is. Recreation is
Right,
recreation.
right.
That's what you do to yourself out on the golf course. And they can play that course and love it, and yet it's a course that has hosted our state amateur championship, our top amateur,
so many years.
39 times. And to show again that it stood the test of time, it's coming back in 2014.
Good.
So it'll be the 40th time that
It
the
does
course is hosted.
so much to boost the Charlevoix economy.
It really did over the years. If you think about some of the things that it did for Charlevoix and still does for Charlevoix. One, the publicity. I'm looking in the pro shop today, the young man that's taken over for me, Marty Joy, now has in the clubhouse all the pictures of all the major champions in golf that have played at the Belvedere.
Oh, I have
And
to
it's
go take a look.
It's a long list, including Walter Hagen and Tommy Armour, Horton Smith, Bobby Jones, maybe the
Really?
greatest of all time, Tom Watson.
Really?
Tom Watson's dad had a place over on Walloon, so Ray would bring Tom over as a young boy to play. Tom's an 8-time major champion, still calls it one of his favorite golf courses to play. So
Really?
highly skilled players can play it, and yet people of lesser golfing abilities can play it and enjoy it because it doesn't beat them up. We're going to be putting in about 8 more tees over the next couple of years, so it'll stand the test of time in terms of length. But getting back to your question about what did it do for Charlevoix over the years? Well, the expression today when you're trying to do marketing for a city that relies on tourism is getting heads in beds. How many heads can you get in the beds in town? And that's what that did, and it did it at an important time when you think about when in the year it fell. It's always held right after Father's Day.
Yes.
Well, you think about our beautiful little town here. We get our first boost of tourism happens with Memorial Day. But then it doesn't really happen again until about the 4th of July when all the summer people get here. In that dead zone in between is when the Michigan Amateur was always held.
Shoulder.
So it would bring 150 players to town who were all trying to qualify in stroke play to get into the match play portion of the tournament. It would bring 30 or so Golf Association of Michigan volunteers and their families, and they would be here. And it also, back then, with the media being restricted to, I mean, communication today, there's a million ways that things get out there with the internet and everything, but back then it was radio, television, and print media. And print media was big back then.
Yes.
And so you had all of these top writers from around the state, golf writers, who would come to the state amateur. Doesn't happen as much today because, you know, the newspapers are shrinking and shrinking, but back then it was a big deal. So all of the top writers from around the state, and many of them were golf writers, that was their beat period, would be here for the state amateur. And so our little town had all of these people here, but also the word was getting back to their communities, telling them how beautiful Charlevoix was, and the city on 3 lakes, and the drawbridge, and all the wonderful things.
You told me a lot of people bought cottages up here.
Yeah, that's the other thing, because not only what it did bring to Charlevoix, but what it does bring. There are a lot of folks like myself that played here many years as amateurs who fell in love with this area and bought summer homes up here. Or if not just summer homes, still come up and spend a week or so. I have people still coming to the golf club during the same week, people of my vintage that stay in the same cottages that they stayed in when they were competing in the tournament, and they come back that same week and meet with some of those same people. Now, of course, they have grandchildren that are staying there, but they're back here for that same week. So it meant a lot to Charlevoix. It meant a lot to the local business people, to the restaurants, to the hotels, to the shops, and to the whole area, Petoskey, Harbor Springs, because people didn't leave when they came here. I'll give you, I came here first in '64, and I just fell in love with the area immediately. So when I could afford to, a few years later, because I was quite young then, I would spend a week. I mean, I knew I was going to get knocked out of the tournament at some point, unless I was lucky enough to go all the way to the end where you end up with 2 people. You're going to get knocked out at some point. But I'd make it a week's vacation. And many people did that. And friendships were formed. And friendships were formed with local people. And so it still does do things for us today, because a lot of those people now are property owners up here.
And you told me one time that they posted the results at the Argonne.
They did. You would, today, you know, in the tournaments, you call a number, or you look on the internet and you know what the scores were. You can do that from your motel room. Back then, there wasn't that kind of communication, so they had to post them somewhere. So they'd post them out at the Argonne. You'd go out for a shrimp dinner. You'd find out if you made it into match play, who you were playing against the next day, and people would start talking about it, and the caddies would bet on it.
Oh, that's
They'd
great.
have the pairing sheets up, and they would bet on it. So it was and is still a big part of Charlevoix, and I'm glad we got it back in 2003, and we've got it coming back in 2014.
That's good news.
I know the membership will embrace it.
That's good news. Now tell us a little bit about yourself. At your first amateur.
The first year I came up here, I was, let's see, I would have been 19 years old. It was 1964. Didn't play very well. Thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread, of course. Your world's about that big when you're 19. But I can remember a dear friend of mine, Chuck McGilvery, was in a playoff to get into match play. And I remember going to the first tee to see how he would do in this playoff. There maybe were 5 or 6 people for 3 spots that were still left, the bottom spots, but he was going to have a chance to get in. And it was snowing so hard.
In
June, you could not see the first green.
Oh my.
Now, the flakes were like this, and they melted the minute that they hit the ground. But I thought to myself, man, I've come back then about 4 hours north from the Flint area. What kind of place have I come to? You know, then in June it snows like this. But, you know, that's freakish, as we all know.
Right.
But it can still happen. I can remember relating to that. Some of my older members now talk about how they used to always have fires in the cottages.
Oh, absolutely.
In the summer, every night.
Right.
Now that's changed. Now they're putting in air conditioning.
That's right.
But I fell in love with the place, and I was in the insurance business for a number of years, and so was an amateur, and I was involved in running the Flint Junior Golf Association back then, and also spent a little time with the American Junior Golf Association out of Atlanta during Phil Mickelson's run, got to know him a little bit. And I sold my business in the early 80s. Went to work for AJJ for a little bit, American Junior Golf, but I was on the road so much, my wife and I said, you know, this just isn't going to work. We need to spend more time together. So what was I going to do? And again, this friend of mine, was Chuck McGilvery, built Dunmaglass, a beautiful golf course here just outside of Charlevoix. And after working there for him for a number of years, when he sold it, I got lucky and was asked to become the head professional here at the Belvedere. So it's you know, the circle, silly circle of life. I was very blessed to end up there because the membership has been very generous.
Emblem you're
Well,
wearing.
you asked me to wear this today.
Yes.
I'll flash this to him. This is just the Golf Association of Michigan emblem, and I'm now on the board of governors of the GAM, the first golf professional ever to be on that board, and I'm privileged to be involved with that, and I'm the head of the championship committee of the GAM now.
Didn't they give you an honor recently?
No, they're not honoring me at all, but I'm having fun with it at any rate. But the GAM runs all of the amateur championships throughout the state of Michigan, women's and men's event, non-handicap events, handicap events, mixed events, but all of the championships. They also administer all of the handicapping systems throughout the state, and they're the representative of the United States Golf Association.
I see.
And conduct their various events. And these were the people that I bumped into when I was a young kid here, because they would be out officiating the event. And of course, if you made it to the Sweet 16, the final 16 players that were left, we would always then, and I only got there a few times, but that dinner would be held with some Belvedere members.
Right.
And the 16 players and local business people that had helped with the event, and the 16 players at the Gray Gables.
Gray Gables.
And that was always a great occasion. The
Do they
last
still
time
do that?
I'm sorry?
Do they still do it?
Well, the nice thing about that is that the last time that we held it here in 2003, we invited back all of the past champions and finalists. And they all but just a few were able to come back, and we held that dinner at the Belvedere Casino. And it was wonderful to be able to recognize some of those people. We did a program at the time. It was the 92nd Michigan Amateur Championship, and I interviewed all of the past multiple champions.
I see.
One of them was Peter Green. He won it in 4 separate decades. The one year I got to the finals, he beat me in the finals. And Pete, in here, in that interview, says what it really felt like to all of us here. I'll just read from it. When he speaks of the Belvedere in the Charlevoix area, there's a warmth that comes to his tone. And I quote Pete here, "I know there were various reasons that the event got moved, but when it was at the Belvedere, it was really special. There were so many factors involved, coming to the same beautiful area where each year new experiences were discovered, going out to dinner at area restaurants and bumping into other players and their families, having townspeople and members come out in large numbers to watch, playing this wonderful course with its small undulating greens. It was just a week my family and I look forward to, just as I'm looking forward to this year's event."
Perfect.
Yeah, it was, and that's sort of what it felt like.
Exactly.
You know, it was just, it was a week. It wasn't just a golf tournament. You were coming here for a week to a beautiful course in a beautiful area, and many people, you know, live up here now because of it.
Right.
That played in it.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Belvedere Scholarship Fund that I've heard about?
Yeah, it's turned into something that's really wonderful. A gentleman by the name of Bob Klein was invited to join a number of years back now, and he endowed this fund, starting out for the young boys and girls that worked on the bag staff and caddied at the Belvedere.
I see.
To provide college scholarships for them. Then the whole membership got involved. Today, nearly $40,000 to $50,000 a year is put out by the members
Isn't that wonderful?
to take care of these kids. And each year, if you've worked at the Belvedere for 3 years and have done well in school, and have been accepted at a college, each of those kids gets a college scholarship.
3 students?
Each of them. I know right now there are a good 8 or 9 students that are on that. All graduating seniors, because it's not just a one-year scholarship. It follows them the whole 4 years, anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 apiece. So it's a wonderful thing. What it meant for me personally was every kid on my staff was smarter than me. Because I had all these kids that started out as caddies, but once Bob and the membership got that scholarship fund going, the parents knew about it.
Uh-huh.
So all of the kids that really stood out,
Right.
I would end up getting to get on my staff. So I ended up with every kid on my staff was brighter than me. Made it easy to run it out there. It's just been it's one of the many things that I know that the Belvedere Club does, and many other things behind the scenes that I know that a lot of people don't know much about.
Right, that's absolutely true. And then you have also a junior golf program that's very popular.
Yeah, it's
for the local kids.
It's turned into a very nice thing, I think. A number of years ago now, and I'm going to be wrong on the dates, but I'm going to say maybe about 15 years ago, Dean Davenport and Tom Bickerstaff and I and a couple other people got together and said, let's get a junior program going, because that was my background, running the one in Flint. We had, when I started, it started in 1939. When I took over at 550 kids, we ended up with 1,100 kids every Monday. So that was my background. We got it going here, and Dean has done just an incredible job with it. Dean is a local, Charlevoix boy,
yes.
And was for many years, was the athletic director at Ferris State University. And we asked him to take it over when we got it going, and he just spends untold hours on it, and the program has become nationally recognized. It's obviously not as large as some of the ones in the big cities, but we'll get up to a couple hundred kids. It runs nearly all summer. All of the local courses participate. Dunmaglass, Charlevoix Country Club, Charlevoix Golf Club, the municipal course, which,
now,
by the way, used to be the Chicago Club.
Yes. Yes.
And now it was deeded over to the city, and they sold off 9 of the holes, but it's a fine public golf course. They're involved.
It's #1 in the state of Michigan, I read.
It's a nice public golf course. And Antrim Dells is involved. So all of the area courses in the Belvedere Club, what they do in addition to being a site for the clinics is on Sunday evenings, play drops off at the Belvedere. So at 6 o'clock on Sunday evenings, we take all of the